So Abraham, Yitzhak, and Jacob would call on the Almighty through titles. There is a moment when Hagar, the concubine who Abraham took instead of Sarah, because Sarah told him that was the way that he would get children, um, who became the mother of Ishmael, from whom the Ishmaelites, the Muslims, come basically. 2 times when she went to the desert. And the first one, she thought she was going to die. And well, I'm going to read from Genesis 16:9. It says, "The angel of Yahweh said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand," being the mistress Sarah, wife of Abraham. Verse 10 says, "Then the angel of Yahweh said to her, I will multiply your descendants." Look at this. The angel of Yahweh, when we read this, we see it as the messenger. We are seeing the third person. Yahweh is sending the message, then one is receiving the message, but there is this third person, which is the angel. My point is here that it doesn't say, "And Yahweh said, I will multiply your descendants." It says, "And the angel of Yahweh said, I will multiply your descendants." And like I said, it is from Ishmael that the Muslims come. And it is also interesting to know that right now they are the first in multiplying in the world. They actually are first, and when it comes to how many children they have, second are Latinos, and then other nations, but really, really bad the ratio, since nowadays most people try not to have children, or in some countries are prohibited from having children. So if time kept going another 100 years, the world would become Muslim just because of that, just because how they multiply. And it is interesting to see it in scripture. "I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude." And the angel of Yahweh said to her, "Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because Yahweh has heard your affliction." Look how now he doesn't say, "Because I have heard your affliction." Now he says, "Because Yahweh has heard your affliction." So it is the angel saying the message. And since we know that it's the angel, the scripture is telling us Yahweh heard her affliction. It wasn't the angel. However, when the angel told her that her seed will be multiplied, he said it in the first person. So that is interesting, and that is a teaching for another time. So it says, verse 12, "He shall be a wild man." He shall be a wild man. And that is why many people from that religion, Islam, have taken their teachings to go wild and do things that they shouldn't, of course. And like we know, also the media lies a lot, and is trying to put everybody against the Muslims. But of course, it is true that many who are extremists and have taken the Quran and other writings see in those writings that the way to evangelize, if I could use that word, even though I shouldn't, in their religion is to either you convert or you die. And some just are peaceful and are waiting for others to die until Muslims take control of the world, while others are trying to speed up the process and are killing people if they don't convert. So we see it from this verse. "He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." That's why there's so much problem in what they call nowadays Palestine. He shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. But this is the verse that I wanted to read. Then she called the name of Yahweh who spoke to her, "You are the Elohim who sees." For she said, "Have I also here seen him who sees me?" So I repeat. Then she called the name of Yahweh who spoke to her, "You are the Elohim who sees." So if she, Hagar, lived with Abraham, and Abraham is the father of the faith, how come she didn't know the name of the father? Here she should have said, "I have just seen Yahweh." However, she doesn't say that. The scripture tells us that the name that she decided to call Yahweh was, "You are the Elohim who sees." So this is very important, because here we see that people, before having the name, would call on the Father through names that they would make up, or titles that were very generic, or would only apply to him, like Shaddai, the Almighty. So they would call on him through titles, using titles. Even though Hagar was having a son from Abraham, she didn't know the name of the father, because Abraham did not know the name of the father either. They would call on the father through titles. So it is very important to understand this. This was a time before going to Egypt, of course. So it says, then she called the name of Yahweh who spoke to her, "You are the Elohim who sees." So she was pretty basic with the name. She told, "You are the Elohim who sees everything." This is interesting because we know the eye on the $1 bill that they call the all-seeing eye, and as we know, that is the eye of Lucifer, and Lucifer is an angel who fell. And like I said, it's interesting that it was the angel who told Ishmael that he will multiply them. She gave a title. She gave a name to the Almighty, because humans did not know the name of the Almighty. They were just getting to know who the Almighty was. Everybody was worshiping the creation, idols, or fallen angels, or demons. But then Abraham was more spiritual, and was, of course, wise, very smart. And he was able to realize that the moon was not the Almighty, that the sun was not the Almighty, that the clouds were not the Almighty, that the rain was not the Almighty, as we see in the book of Yashar. And eventually he realized there was only one Almighty to whom all those other things served. So Abraham has a child with Hagar. Hagar has an experience with the angel of Yahweh. She thinks it's Yahweh himself. And instead of calling him Yahweh, she calls him the Elohim who sees. For she said, "Have I also here seen him who sees me?" Therefore the well was called Be'er Lahai Roy, which is basically the well of he who sees.